They tried to fine me $5,000 0 cents for having unapproved grass. Then they tried to use that fake fine to put a lien on my house. But when they laid a hand on my daughter, that's when they learned what a real debt looks like. Turns out the price for threatening a Navy SEAL's kid is 2 shattered kneecaps and a whole lot of crawling. They thought they were predators. I was about to teach them how the food chain really works. Let me know in the comments what the most ridiculous HOA violation you've ever heard of is. And stick around to see how I turn their own scam into their worst nightmare. Where are you all watching from tonight? All right, settle in. Before we get to the part with the screaming and the sirens, you need to understand where this all went down. My name is Mark, and for a good chunk of my adult life, my job description was, let's say, complex. I was a Navy SEAL, but my specialty wasn't just kicking in doors. It was signals intelligence, SIGINT. I learned how to listen, how to find people who didn't want to be found, and how to map out an enemy's entire network from the whispers they left in the digital world. When I finally hung up my gear for good, all I wanted was the opposite of that life. I wanted peace and quiet. More importantly, I wanted a place where my daughter, Lily, could grow up with a backyard bigger than a postage stamp and the only loud noises being her own laughter. She was 8, all pigtails and skinned knees, and she was my whole world. We found it. 5 acres of Texas hill country, just far enough outside the formal city limits of our little town that you couldn't be annexed. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. The air had that distinct, sharp smell of cedar and hot dust, a perfume I'd come to associate with home. When you walked up the driveway, you could hear the crunch of limestone gravel under your boots and the constant high-pitched buzz of cicadas in the summer heat. This land was our sanctuary. I built a workshop for my new business, a small cybersecurity consultancy, and a swing set for Lily. Life was simple. It was good. And then the letter came. It was in a crisp, cream-colored envelope, looking more professional than my last bank statement. The letterhead was embossed, Oak Creek Meadows Property Owners Association. I raised an eyebrow. Oak Creek Meadows was a new, high-end development about a mile down the road, the kind of place with fountains at the entrance and rules about what color you can paint your mailbox. I read the first line. Dear property owner, a routine inspection has identified a covenant violation at your address. Non-compliant landscaping, unapproved grass species. I actually laughed. Unapproved grass? I looked out at my lawn, a rugged mix of St. Augustine and whatever else God decided to plant there. The fine was listed as $250, 0 cents. I knew for a damn fact my property wasn't part of any HOA. That was the #1 requirement when I bought the place. I figured it was just some overzealous bureaucrat with an out-of-date map. So, I did what any reasonable person would do. I tossed the letter onto the pile of junk mail on my counter and forgot about it. That was my first mistake. A week later, a pristine white golf cart whined its way up my long driveway. Behind the wheel was a woman who was the living, breathing embodiment of a passive-aggressive email. She had to be in her late 50s, with perfectly coiffed blonde hair that looked like it would shatter in a high wind, expensive-looking athletic wear, and a clipboard she held like a scepter. "I can help you?" I asked, walking out onto my porch. She gave me a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "I'm Carolyn, the head of covenant compliance for the Oak Creek Meadows POA. Her eyes did a quick dismissive scan of my property. "Mr. Johnson, we sent you a notice." "The one about the grass? Yeah, I got it. It's a mistake. My property isn't part of your association." Her smile tightened just a fraction. She glanced at my truck, a reliable, if slightly muddy, 2012 Ford F-150. Then her gaze lingered on my large workshop, which had more in common with an aircraft hangar than a garden shed. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "sometimes these things get grandfathered in when a community of our standard is established nearby. We find that people who aren't a good fit for the community's aesthetic standards often have trouble keeping up." The insult was as subtle as a punch to the gut. She wasn't just talking about my grass, she was talking about me. The single dad, the guy with grease under his nails. I wasn't her kind of people. She pulled a fresh piece of paper from her clipboard. "This is your second notice. The fine has now doubled to $500, 0 cents for failure to cure the violation. I'd take care of it promptly if I were you." She handed it to me and, without another word, put the golf cart in reverse and silently motored away. I stood there on my porch, the Texas sun beating down, and I realized this wasn't a mix-up. This was a declaration of war. The amusement I'd felt was gone, replaced by a cold, familiar feeling, the calm before a mission. This wasn't about grass anymore. This was about a bully who had crossed my fence line and decided she owned the place. For a week, I heard nothing. Then, another envelope arrived, this time via certified mail, which meant I had to sign for it. It was their final notice. The fine was now $1,000, 0 cents. Tucked inside were grainy, pixelated photos of my lawn, clearly taken with a cell phone camera from the road. It looked like something you'd see on a Bigfoot documentary. Attached to the fine was a thick stapled document full of so much legalese it could choke a lawyer. It cited bylaws and community covenants that they claimed I was magically bound by. The whole package was designed to intimidate, to make an average person feel overwhelmed and just pay up to make the problem go away. But I'm not the average person. My training taught me to see past the noise and find the signal. The old instincts kicked in. My demeanor shifted from that of a homeowner to an analyst. This wasn't a dispute, it was an operation. And you don't go into an operation blind. I sat down at my computer, the low, steady hum of the server rack in my office a comforting sound. It was time to do some basic reconnaissance. This brings me to our first little knowledge nugget of the day. If you ever find yourself in a situation like this, your first and best friend is your local government's website. Specifically, the County Appraisal District's online map and the County Clerk's records portal. Knowledge Nugget 1. The County Clerk Deep Dive. I pulled up my county's appraisal district map. It shows you the exact legally recognized boundaries of every single piece of property. I found my parcel of land, clear as day, with its own distinct ID number. Then, I took that ID over to the county clerk's online records search. This is where every official document tied to a property, deeds, mortgages, and most importantly, any covenants, conditions, and restrictions, or CC&Rs, has to be legally recorded. I typed in my info and hit enter. The result? Nothing. No HOA, no covenants, no restrictions. My 5 acres were as free and clear as the Texas sky. The takeaway? Your county clerk's website is your first line of defense. If a covenant ain't recorded there, it's usually not worth the paper it's printed on. This was the first mini twist. They weren't just mistaken, they were lying. This was fraud. But my search turned up something else, something that sent a little red flag up the pole in my mind. I did a business search for the Oak Creek Meadows HOA. I found it, registered as a limited liability company, an LLC, just 3 months prior. That's odd. Most legitimate HOAs have been around for years, usually set up when the development is first planned. The registered agent for this LLC wasn't a law firm or a management company. It was a P.O. box in a city 50 miles away. Now, my internal alarms were starting to go off. This smelled wrong. It had the faint, sour scent of a deliberate scam. The very next day, the psychological games began. The white golf cart reappeared. This time, Carlin was joined by a large, silent man in a matching polo shirt and wraparound sunglasses. Let's call him Bert. He sat in the passenger seat, arms crossed over his chest, looking like a budget bin movie heavy. They didn't drive up to the house. They didn't say a word. They just parked at the very edge of my property line, right at the end of the driveway, and sat there for a full hour, just watching. I watched them back from the window of my office. From here, I could analyze them. Carolyn pretending to look at her phone, but her head was angled just so, making sure I could see her. Bert perfectly still, a cheap intimidation tactic meant to project physical threat without doing anything overtly illegal. They were sloppy. They thought this was enough to scare someone. I felt a cold knot of something that wasn't anger, but focus, tighten in my gut. My first instinct, the civilian one, was to march out there and tell them to get lost. But the professional in me took over. Why reveal myself? Why let them know they'd gotten under my skin? Let them think they're in control. Let the enemy underestimate you. That's how you win. Lily came into my office then, her face clouded with worry. "Daddy," she said, pointing out the window, "why is that mean lady here again?" And right there, that was the moment this whole thing changed. They could mess with me all day long. They could send me fake letters and take blurry pictures of my lawn, but the second they put a shadow of fear on my daughter's face, they had crossed a line that they couldn't even see. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They had just made it personal. After the staring contest, the harassment went digital. I started getting emails. At first glance, they looked official, like they were coming from some kind of automated neighborhood watch system. The subject lines were designed to create anxiety. Reports of unkempt property on Hilltop Lane. Community concerns regarding property values. One of them, titled "Maintaining Our Standards," was particularly nasty. It spoke of how one poorly maintained property can have a cascading negative effect on the investments of hard-working families nearby. It was all passive-aggressive corporate speak, designed to make you feel like a social pariah. They were always BCC'd, hiding the recipient list, a classic trick to make it seem like this was a community-wide conversation that I was just the unfortunate subject of. The goal was to manufacture the illusion of peer pressure, to make me feel like all my neighbors were whispering about me behind my back. One afternoon, Lily came up to me while I was reading one. "Is that another scary email, Daddy?" she asked, her voice small. I closed the laptop. That settled it. They had brought the fight to my home turf, the internet. I felt a grim smile touch my lips. They had just moved the battle from the front yard to my kill box. I sat down in my office chair, the worn leather sighing under my weight. It was time to stop defending and start hunting. I opened one of the emails, and instead of reading the garbage in the body, I went straight for the source code. This is where we get to our next trick, something anyone can do. It's amazing what people broadcast about themselves without even knowing it. Knowledge nugget 2. Chasing ghosts in the email header. Every email you've ever received has something called a header. It's a chunk of code that works like a digital postmark, containing information about the email's journey from the sender to you. In most email programs, you can view it by clicking something like Show Original or View Source. It looks like a bunch of gibberish, but in that gibberish is the sending IP address, the unique internet address of the computer or server that sent the email. I just copied that IP address and pasted it into a free online tool called MX Toolbox, which acts like a reverse phone book for the internet. The takeaway: every email leaves a trail, and learning to read the scenery on that digital highway can tell you exactly where your enemy is hiding. The result I got back was the second mini twist, and it was a big one. The IP address wasn't from a server in Texas. It wasn't even from a server in the United States. The address resolved to a data center in Moldova. This wasn't just any data center. It was a well-known bulletproof host. For those who don't know, a bulletproof host is like a digital slumlord for criminals. They knowingly rent out server space to people engaged in illegal activities. Spammers, scammers, malware distributors, and they actively refuse to cooperate with law enforcement. It's the internet's version of a no questions asked offshore bank account. I had to laugh. It was just so perfectly, absurdly hypocritical. You know, I muttered to my empty office, for a group so obsessed with the specific pedigree of my grass, you'd think they'd use a web host that wasn't famous for hosting guys who sell fake Rolexes and Russian dating scams. It's like demanding a black-tie dress code for a party held in a dumpster fire. This changed the entire threat profile. This wasn't a power-tripping Karen in a golf cart anymore. This was a professional scam with an international digital footprint. They were using offshore servers to mask their identity while trying to shake down a guy who used to track actual terrorists through the same digital shadows. They were a couple of kids with water pistols picking a fight with a battleship. Their next move proved how serious they were. Another letter arrived. It was thicker this time, and the language was even more aggressive. It was a notice of intent to place a lien on my property. The amount they claimed I owed in fines and fees had now ballooned to a nice round $5,000, 0 cents. This was their ace in the hole. A lien is a legal claim against a property. If I ever wanted to sell my house or refinance it, I'd have to pay them off first. It's a powerful weapon, a legal maneuver so terrifying to most homeowners that it practically guarantees they'll write a check, no questions asked, just to make it go away. They thought they had me cornered. They thought they had me beat. What they didn't know was that I was just getting started, and I was already inside their walls. The lien threat was a serious escalation, but I knew it was still just paper. Their next move was physical. I had to take Lily to a doctor's appointment one afternoon. I was gone for less than 2 hours, but that was all the time they needed. As I was pulling back onto my street, my phone buzzed with an alert from my security system. I have cameras covering the perimeter of my property, a habit from my old life that had just paid for itself. I tapped the notification and watched the recorded footage. The video was crystal clear, high definition. It showed the white golf cart pulling up, and the big goon Bert getting out. He walked right past my no trespassing sign, bold as brass, carrying a hammer and a large, offensively bright orange sign. He marched right up to one of the big, beautiful oak trees in my front yard and nailed the sign to it. The camera zoomed in. In big black letters it read, "Covenant violation, property subject to lien." My blood ran cold. This was different. This wasn't just a letter or an email. This was a public shaming. It was a physical defacement of my property. It was a direct, in-your-face challenge. My first instinct was pure white-hot rage. I wanted to drive down to that pristine little community of theirs and find Bert and show him what a real violation looked like. But I didn't. The training kicked back in, smothering the anger with cold, hard strategy. You never fire until you have a perfect shot. You never move until you know the enemy's full strength and disposition. Anger gets you killed. Patience and information win the war. I downloaded the high-definition footage of Bert's little adventure and saved it to a secure encrypted drive. I didn't call the police. Not yet. The cops would see a misdemeanor, a property dispute. I was seeing a pattern, a conspiracy. I wasn't just building a case, I was building a kill file. It was time to escalate my own intelligence gathering. This whole scam felt personal, targeted. I needed to know who these people really were. It was time for some open-source intelligence. OSINT. That night, after Lily was asleep, I dove in. It's a fancy term for stalking people online, but with a purpose. I fell down a rabbit hole of public records, clicking through a chain of forgotten local news articles, archived court documents, and old social media profiles that painted a grim picture of Carolyn Vance and Bert Miller. And that's when I hit the next mini twist. This one was a payload. Carolyn Vance wasn't just some power-tripping HOA president. A search of state licensing records showed she used to be a real estate agent. Used to be. Her license had been permanently revoked 5 years earlier for her involvement in a mortgage fraud scheme. I found an old article from the San Antonio Express News. It quoted one of her victims, a single mother who lost her home. Carolyn promised us the American dream. She knew we couldn't afford it, but she pushed the papers through anyway. We lost everything. Her brother Bert was even simpler. A string of public records showed he was a former tow truck driver, with a couple of misdemeanor assault charges on his record from disputes over his towing practices. One charge was dropped after the witness suddenly decided not to testify. I leaned back from my desk, the only light in the room the cold blue glow of the monitor on my face. A chill went down my spine. The pieces started clicking into place with a sickening finality. These weren't community-minded neighbors. They were predators. A disgraced real estate fraudster and her muscle-bound brother, a professional intimidator. Their target wasn't my lawn. Their target was my land. They weren't trying to build a better community. They were trying to steal one, piece by vulnerable piece. I turned to the whiteboard on my wall and started diagramming their network. This mission had just been greenlit. I had their identities and their criminal histories. I knew their methods of harassment. But I was still missing the final piece of the puzzle, the end game. What was the master plan? The phony fines, the lien threats. It felt like too much work for just a few $1,000. There had to be something bigger. To find it, I had to follow the money. The notice of intent to lien they'd sent me had payment information on it. To resolve this matter and avoid further legal action, please remit payment to the Oak Creek Meadows POA LLC. It included a link to a website with a payment portal. I clicked on it. The website was a masterpiece of cheap design. It used a generic template, stock photos of smiling, unnervingly perfect families, and was riddled with typos. It screamed fly-by-night operation. For a cybersecurity guy, a sloppy website is like a trail of blood in the snow. I wasn't going to hack them in the traditional sense. I wasn't going to steal money or crash their site. I was on a reconnaissance mission. I started probing the website's architecture, looking for weaknesses. It didn't take long. They were using a cheap, outdated plugin on a basic WordPress installation to handle their payments, and it had a well-known vulnerability, a simple directory traversal bug. For you non-techie folks, imagine the website is a house. This bug was the equivalent of them leaving the back door not just unlocked but wide open. It allowed me to peek into the file structure of their server, to see the folders and files they never intended for public view. I moved through their digital corridors like a ghost, and there, in a misconfigured folder carelessly named POA_backup, I found it. The motherlode. Their entire playbook. It was a single spreadsheet file. I downloaded it, my heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and disgust. I opened it. The screen lit up with their malice, all neatly organized into columns. It was a list of over 24 properties, all in the unincorporated areas of the county, just like mine. It listed the owners' names. Next to each name were their notes, their reasons for targeting these specific people. John and Mary Smith, elderly owners, fixed income, susceptible to legal pressure. Sarah Jenkins, single mom, works 2 jobs, too busy/tired to fight. The Miller Place, foreclosure notice filed last month, desperate. Then I found my own name, Mark Johnson, vet, possible PTSD, single dad, good target for pressure tactics. They thought my service was a weakness they could exploit. They saw my love for my daughter as a vulnerability. That was a profound miscalculation. But it was the final column that laid their entire conspiracy bare. The column header was acquisition target. Their goal wasn't to collect a few $1,000s in phony fines. That was just the tool. The real goal was to harass, intimidate, and pressure these vulnerable people with the threat of a fraudulent lien until they either panicked and sold their property cheap, or until the lien could be used to trigger a foreclosure. And who would be waiting in the wings to snap up these properties for pennies on the dollar? I found that answer in another folder. Incorporation documents for a shell company named Hill Country Holdings, LLC, with Carolyn Vance listed as the sole managing member. This was the mic drop moment right here in the silence of my home office. It hit me like a physical blow. They weren't a fake HOA. They were sophisticated property thieves, using the color of law and the structure of an HOA as their weapon. They were vultures circling my community, picking off who they thought were the weakest members of the herd. And I realized my mission had just changed. It wasn't about saving my own property anymore. It was about saving all of them. It was about burning this entire rotten enterprise to the ground. The spreadsheet was my smoking gun, my map to their entire operation. My first instinct was to kick down the nearest door, but my training screamed at me to slow down. A premature move would scatter them. Going to the police right now would be a gamble. A smart lawyer could tie this up in civil court for years, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. No, I couldn't just win. I had to annihilate them. I needed to let them walk deeper into the trap until they committed a crime so blatant, so undeniable, that no lawyer could explain it away. I needed allies. My first stop wasn't a police station. It was the county clerk's office. I made an appointment with the head clerk herself, a woman named Marlene. Marlene was in her late 60s, with a no-nonsense haircut and eyes that had seen every scam, sob story, and swindle this county had to offer for the last 40 years. I didn't give her hypotheticals. I laid out the evidence on her desk, the printout of their fake LLC, the fraudulent lien threat, and the target list from the spreadsheet. Her face, normally a stoic mask of bureaucratic patience, hardened into a block of granite. The smell of old paper and ozone from the copying machines filled her office as she silently read through the documents. She was personally offended. These scammers were using the legitimacy of her office, the sanctity of public records, as a weapon against her citizens. The unmitigated gall, she finally whispered, her voice like gravel. They think they can use my office to run their dirty little game. She looked up at me. What do you need, Mr. Johnson? I need you to let them file the lien, I said. But the second it hits your system, I need you to flag it and call the sheriff. I want them to complete the crime. Marlene nodded slowly. Consider it done. The sheriff owes me a favor. Alley number 1 secured. Next, I needed to control the narrative. This couldn't be a quiet arrest that got buried on page 6 of the newspaper. This needed to be a public execution, I did some research and found a young, hungry reporter at the Hill County Chronicle named Jessica. Her byline was on all the interesting stories, the ones that dug a little deeper than the usual town council meetings and bake sale announcements. I sent her a cryptic email. I have a story about a multi-million-dollar property fraud ring operating in our county. Interested? She called me within 5 minutes. I met her for coffee and gave her the broad strokes, withholding the names in the final plan, but showing her enough of the anonymized evidence to prove it was real. Her eyes lit up with the fire of a journalist who just stumbled upon the story of her career. I made her a deal. Hold the story. When I give you the signal, you be there. You'll get the exclusive on the whole thing from start to finish. She agreed instantly. Alley number 2 in place. Finally, and most importantly, I needed to arm the other targets. I spent the next 2 days driving the back roads of our county. I used the list from the spreadsheet and paid a quiet visit to every family on it. To the elderly couple, the Smiths. To Sarah Jenkins, the single mom. I showed them the evidence. I showed them they weren't alone. The fear in their eyes was slowly replaced by a dawning, simmering anger. I created a secure, encrypted chat group for all of us to communicate. This is where I shared our third knowledge nugget, a crucial piece of legal ammunition. Knowledge nugget 3, the power of a fraudulent lien lawsuit. I explained to the group that what these people were doing wasn't just illegal. It was a specific civil offense called slander of title by filing a fraudulent lien. In Texas and in many other states, if someone knowingly files a false or fraudulent lien against your property just to cause you harm, you can sue them, not just to get the lien removed, but for actual monetary damages they caused, plus punitive damages to punish them. I told them we could have sent a cease and desist letter, but that would have just warned them. It was better to let the snake crawl all the way out of its hole before chopping its head off. The takeaway? Never let a bully know you figured out their game. Let them keep playing until they've broken so many laws they can't talk their way out of it. I also advised them all to install security cameras, even cheap ones, and to place fraud alerts on their credit reports. The trap was now set. Every player was in position. All we had to do was wait for the villains of our story to make their final, fatal move. The air itself seemed to hum with anticipation. The silence from our end of the line clearly made them nervous. When their target suddenly stopped responding, the scammers must have felt the pressure. Their tactics, which had been psychological and legal, now turned to petty, physical harassment. They were getting sloppy, desperate. One evening, I was in the middle of making dinner when the water in the kitchen sink sputtered and died. I knew instantly what it was. A quick check of my security camera feed confirmed it. The footage, timestamped just 5 minutes earlier, showed Bert's hulking silhouette as he crept up to the water main valve near the road. With a quick turn of a wrench, he shut off my water supply. It was such a juvenile, pointless act of sabotage. It took me all of 2 minutes to walk down the driveway and turn it back on. I saved the new footage to the evidence file. It was another nail for his coffin. My preparation, in contrast, was silent and invisible. I was a digital ghost. To Carolyn and Bert, it must have seemed like I had vanished. I didn't answer their increasingly frantic emails. I didn't respond to their threatening voicemails. They likely thought their pressure campaign was working, that I was scared into paralysis. But in the quiet of my office, with Lily safely asleep, I was living in their digital shadow. I tracked their movements through their online activity. They weren't very smart about it. I saw them logging into their fake HOA website's admin panel from the IP address of a local diner's public Wi-Fi. I saw Carolyn's social media posts, checking in at a coffee shop downtown. I knew their routines better than they did. This led them to their most desperate measure yet, and the one that sealed their fate. They decided to attack my character, and they did it by trying to use my daughter as a weapon against me. Carolyn, using a fake profile on Facebook with a picture of a generic-looking golden retriever, started posting in local community groups. The posts were crafted to be insidious, full of vague but damaging implications. Just a word of concern for folks on Hilltop Lane, one began. There's a veteran living out there who seems very troubled. Lots of strange hours, very reclusive. I'm just worried about the environment for his young child. She never used my name, but everyone in our small community knew who she was talking about. She was planting the seeds, trying to paint me as an unstable vet, a dangerous man. She was laying the groundwork for a call to Child Protective Services. This was their nuclear option, but they underestimated the community they were trying to poison. The moment the post went up, my new allies went to work. Sarah, the single mom, was the first to comment. This is a disgusting, baseless rumor about a good man and a wonderful father. I know this family personally. Shame on you. Then John Smith, the elderly man they'd targeted, replied next, his words carrying the weight of his age. My wife and I have known Mark since he moved in. He is the best and most respectful neighbor we have ever had. This post is slander, plain and simple, and whoever wrote it is a coward, hiding behind a picture of a dog. More comments flooded in, a dozen digital testimonials to my character. I watched the thread from my office, and for the first time in this whole ordeal, I felt a genuine warmth spread through my chest. These people who were strangers just a week ago were standing up for me. They were fighting back. It was a powerful reminder of what I was fighting for. In my old line of work, we had a concept called threat escalation. You meet the enemy's actions with a proportional response. But you always hold a line they cannot cross without unleashing an overwhelming, disproportionate, and final reaction. For me, that line had always been my family. These people didn't know it, but by trying to use my daughter against me, by threatening the one thing that gave my life peace and purpose, they had just crossed that final line. The strategist in me had done his job. Now the protector had taken over. The fake profile was reported and taken down within hours, but the damage was done. The rules of engagement had changed. They had failed to break me with legal threats, failed to isolate me with public shaming, and now their smear campaign had blown up in their faces. They were cornered animals. And that's when they make the stupidest mistakes. Carolyn must have decided it was time for the final push. My phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I knew who it was. I hit the record button before I answered. "Johnson," I said, my voice flat. "Mark," Carolyn's voice was syrupy sweet, a complete facade. "We seem to have gotten off on the wrong foot here. I'm calling to offer you a way out." "I'm listening." "We know you're struggling," she said, the condescension back in full force. "A single dad, all that land to take care of, it's a lot. We're giving you one last chance. Our investment group is prepared to take the property off your hands. We'll consider your debt to the POA paid in full, and we'll even give you a little something to help you start fresh somewhere else." There it was, the quiet part out loud. "And if I say no?" I asked, feeding her the line. Her voice turned to ice. "Then that $5,000 lien goes public tomorrow morning. It will be filed with the county. It will destroy your credit. And you know, a call to CPS might be in order. A judge won't look kindly on a father who can't even maintain his own home or his finances when deciding what's a stable environment for a child." Click. I hung up. I leaned back in my chair, the recording saved. It was a confession. Extortion, clear as day. Threatening to use a state agency as a weapon. They had just handed me the sword for their own beheading. But I never imagined they would be so stupid, so arrogant, as to try one last thing. It was the next afternoon, around 4 p.m. The Texas air was starting to cool. I was in my workshop cleaning a heavy-duty torque wrench. The big bay door rolled open so I could keep an eye on Lily. She was in the front yard, practicing cartwheels on the very lawn that had started this whole mess. Her laughter echoed in the quiet air. It was a perfect, peaceful moment. A dark sedan, not the golf cart, pulled up to the end of my driveway and stopped. I recognized it from my surveillance. It was Carolyn's car. She stayed in the driver's seat. Bert got out of the passenger side. He didn't look at me. He looked straight at Lily. My hand tightened on the cold, solid steel of the wrench. Time seemed to slow down. I could feel the metallic taste of adrenaline in my mouth. He started walking toward her, forcing a sickly sweet smile onto his brutish face. The world went silent. The hum of the cicadas, the distant birds, the sound of my own breathing, it all vanished. There was no more plan, no more strategy, no more waiting. "Hey there, little one," Bert said, his voice a low rumble. He was only a few feet from her now. His shadow, long in the afternoon sun, fell across her. "Your daddy is having some trouble. Things are a little unsafe here. We're going to take you somewhere safe to wait for him." He reached out his hand, his thick fingers extending toward Lily's small arm. In that instant, the protector became the predator. There was only a threat to be eliminated. I moved. There was no conscious thought behind it. It was a pure, physical response honed by years of training to neutralize a danger to what you hold dear. I covered the 40 feet from my workshop to the yard in a blur of controlled, explosive motion. There was no sound, no war cry. Just the thunder of my boots on the dry grass. He was so focused on Lily, he never even saw me coming. Bert was still reaching for Lily when I hit him. I didn't waste time with a punch. I moved past Lily, using my body to shield her as I drove my shoulder into his center mass. The air whooshed out of his lungs in a surprised grunt. "Go inside, sweetie," I said to Lily, my voice perfectly calm, a stark contrast to the violence of the moment. "Lock the door, it's okay." "Daddy's just taking out the trash." She saw the look on my face and didn't hesitate. She ran for the house. Bert stumbled backward, regaining his footing, his face a mask of shock and rage. "What the hell is your problem, man?" He swung a clumsy, wild punch. I deflected it easily, my hand clamping down on his wrist. I twisted, using his own momentum against him. He spun off balance, and I drove my foot straight into the side of his knee. It wasn't a kick. It was a targeted strike, a disabling blow. There was a sickening crack, a wet, tearing sound that seemed to echo in the sudden stillness. It wasn't loud, but it was final. Bert screamed. It was a high, piercing shriek of pure agony that you only hear when a body is broken in a way it was never meant to bend. He collapsed to the ground, clutching his leg, his face white with pain. In the car, Carolyn's face was a picture of horror. She slammed the car into reverse, the tires spitting gravel, but she wasn't going anywhere. In 2 strides, I was at her door, ripping it open before the lock could engage. She shrieked as I unbuckled her seatbelt and hauled her out of the car and onto her feet. "You're insane. I'm calling the police. You assaulted us," she screamed, fumbling for her phone. And that's when I dropped the mic. "Go ahead," I said, my voice low and cold. "Please do." I took her phone from her trembling hand, turned it around, and dialed 911 myself. "Yes, I'd like to report an attempted kidnapping in progress at 125 Hilltop Lane," I said into the phone, "and an assault. The assailants are still on the scene. Please send a sheriff's deputy immediately. They may require an ambulance." As if on cue, 2 cars came roaring up the road, lights flashing. The first was a county sheriff's patrol car. The second was a sedan carrying Jessica, the reporter, her camera already up and rolling. The deputy, a big man with a calm demeanor, stepped out of his car. "What's going on here, Mark?" It was Sheriff Miller, the man Marlene had put on standby. I pointed to Bert, who was now literally crawling on the ground, dragging his useless leg behind him. I pointed to a hysterical Carolyn. I didn't shout. I didn't get emotional. I calmly handed Sheriff Miller a thick manila folder. "Sheriff," I began, my voice carrying clearly for the reporter's camera, "this is Carolyn Vance and Bert Miller. In this folder, you will find high-definition video evidence of them repeatedly trespassing on my property. You'll find footage of them vandalizing my property and sabotaging my water main. You'll find a full audio recording from yesterday of Ms. Vance here admitting to filing a fraudulent lien in a direct attempt to extort my property from me. And you, Sheriff, were a direct witness to them attempting to abduct my 8-year-old daughter from my front yard." The color drained from Carolyn's face. Her protest died in her throat, replaced by pathetic sobs. Just then, a small crowd started to form. John and Mary Smith had walked over from their property. Sarah Jenkins pulled up in her car. They were all holding their own evidence folders. The entire carefully constructed world of the Oak Creek Meadows Property Owners Association had just been dismantled on a patch of unapproved grass, with a camera rolling and the law looking on. It all came crashing down right there in the public street for everyone to see. The aftermath was swift and decisive. With the mountain of evidence I'd compiled, plus the live-action finale, Carolyn and Bert didn't stand a chance. The reporter, Jessica, had a field day. Her story wasn't just local news. It got picked up by state and even a few national outlets. The headline was sensational. "Fake HOA and property theft ring busted by Navy SEAL dad." The legal fallout for the scammers was a total wipeout. The attempted kidnapping charge was the nail in the coffin, but the prosecutors threw the book at them: racketeering, conspiracy to commit fraud, extortion, filing fraudulent documents. The list went on. The investigation quickly rooted out the other few members of their little conspiracy. Faced with irrefutable evidence, they all flipped or pled guilty. Carolyn and Bert, as the ringleaders, received long prison sentences. They traded their golf cart and clipboards for jumpsuits in a prison cell. But the story didn't end there. The media attention brought a huge spotlight onto this specific type of predatory scam. It turned out it was happening in other rural counties across the state. Spurred by the public outcry, I found myself in a new kind of mission. I started working with Marlene from the county clerk's office and a state representative who had seen the story. This led to our biggest community benefit. Using my cybersecurity background, I helped design the framework for a new, statewide property title protection program. It was a simple but effective idea, a free service where any property owner could register their land. The moment any document, a lien, a deed transfer, anything, was submitted for filing against that property, the system would send an instant automated alert via text message and email to the owner. It wouldn't stop someone from filing the paper, but it would stop them from doing it in secret, giving the owner an immediate chance to challenge it. I held a few free workshops at the local library, teaching people how to use the system and how to spot the warning signs of scams like the one we had defeated. Months later, the Texas heat had given way to a cool autumn evening. My backyard was filled with lights, laughter, and the rich, savory smell of barbecue smoke. I was hosting a big cookout for all the neighbors who had stood together. The Smiths were there, John telling old war stories. Sarah Jenkins was laughing with some other folks, looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen her. Our kids were all running around in a pack, playing tag in the twilight. Lily came up and wrapped her arms around my waist. "This is the best party, Daddy." I looked out at the scene, at the faces of my friends and neighbors, at the peace we had fought for and won. This was community. This was home. The anger and the ice-cold resolve had melted away, replaced by a warmth that had nothing to do with the grill. I had found a new way to serve, a new way to protect, a new kind of peace. They thought they could steal my land. They ended up losing their freedom and uniting a whole community in the process. But believe me, this kind of rot runs deep in small towns. You wouldn't believe what happened next. Wait till I tell you about the crooked city contractor who tried to use a bogus engineering report to condemn a whole neighborhood for a sweetheart development deal. But that's a story for next time. If you or someone you know has a nightmare story about a fake HOA or a property scam, share it in the comments below. Let's get these stories out in the open and help others avoid the same traps. And if you want to see more bullies get exactly what's coming to them, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss what's next.